Hi guys, today I want to bring you a comparison that I find very interesting between two devices from the same brand, Poco X6 Pro and Poco F6. It's an interesting comparison because these are two devices positioned more or less at the same price level and with very similar features. So let's take a look at what aspects they have in common and what are the differences between these devices, and which one I feel like recommending. Let's provide some context. First, let's understand the price at which these devices are sold. I'm considering Amazon prices, which more or less reflect the market trend. We find the Poco X6 Pro in the 8/256 GB version at about €280, while the 12/512 GB version is about €312. As for the Poco F6, we find the 8/256 GB version at about €340. So we see that the X6 Pro costs at least €60 less on average. The price gap increases even more if you consider versions with more RAM and more storage. So consider these as current reference prices and keep them in mind throughout the comparison. Before focusing on the phones, I wanted to compare what you'll get in the box. The package is very rich, as Poco always accustoms us to, including a charger, a case, a USB-C cable, and even a pre-applied screen protector on both devices. In particular, for the X6 Pro, we have a 67-watt charger that recharges from 0 to 100% in about 45 minutes. For the F6, 90 watts, about 35 minutes from 0 to 100%. We also have cases for both that are no longer transparent, but made of this gray plastic. I must say they're well made because they're light, thin, and also protect the cameras. So in terms of accessories, I'd put them almost on par. Consider that fundamentally, the charging time is almost similar. The 90 watts is slightly faster, but heats up the phone a bit more. The software itself recommends using a less powerful mode, so I'd put them practically on par. And these are excellent accessories for both devices. Regarding aesthetics, we can see that in terms of dimensions, these phones are practically identical. We're looking at about 190 grams in weight for both, a thickness of 8.2 millimeters for the X6 Pro and 8 millimeters for the F6. Both are made entirely of polycarbonate, and we see that on the back they adopt a different aesthetic language. Here we have this camera section with three cameras, one 64-megapixel, an 8-megapixel ultra-wide, and a 2-megapixel for macro, along with the LED flash. Here instead we have a 50-megapixel main and an 8-megapixel ultra-wide. Personally, I slightly prefer the design of the Poco F6, but they're both fairly neutral designs and, in my opinion, both pleasing. Let's turn the devices around. We notice the fingerprint unlock for both. It works correctly and excellently for both devices, and let's quickly look at the software, which is very similar. In fact, if we go into the system info, we see that both devices are updated to Xiaomi HyperOS, the latest version of the operating system. By the way, the X6 Pro was the first device launched directly with Xiaomi HyperOS. It was launched in January 2024, while this F6 was launched around May 2024. HyperOS is based on Android 14 for both, so that's excellent from this point of view. In terms of updates, they will consist of 3 years of major updates plus an additional year of security patches for both devices. So I'd put them practically on par. Also because in terms of security patches, we're at May 2024 for both. From here, let's quickly look at some detailed specifications of these devices, which differ substantially in the chipset component that we'll analyze later. Let's talk about the display, guys. As you've seen, it's practically the same identical panel. Even in terms of bezels, you can see how they're among the devices in this price range that offer the best screen-to-body ratio. These bezels are really very thin, very narrow, making them look like higher-end phones, at least from the front. And we're talking about panels of really high quality. We're talking about a 6.67-inch panel with a resolution higher than Full HD, 1220 by 2712 pixels, Super AMOLED with a 120Hz refresh rate for both, super smooth, and with a peak brightness of 1,800 nits for the X6 Pro and 2,400 nits for the Poco F6. But in daily use, guys, I practically didn't notice any differences and I consider them on par. We simply find two small differences on the display side in the AI image engine functionality present on the F6, and in the advanced texture mode which, as it says here, adds rendering effects like blur in the system to provide an enhanced visual experience. Basically, there are some transparency effects in notifications and other small system components, but it's really a tiny difference. So really, the displays get full marks for both. In this price range, guys, we have almost flagship-level displays in terms of color reproduction, brightness, and refresh rate. I really consider them a strong point for both devices. In terms of software then, as I told you, the base is the same. We have a few extra features for the Poco F6. For example, we see here that there's the interconnectivity option that allows you to connect the device with other Poco devices, for example with the Poco tablet. And we find other small differences in the additional settings. We see that there's the AI subtitles function and the active visual perception function, which should practically allow you to control the phone with gestures. But in reality, even when activating this function, I wasn't able to use it. So guys, in terms of software, they're really practically identical even throughout the system. They share the same experience. I must say that the software is very stable. I didn't find any bugs of any kind. Also very smooth. So compared to MIUI, I noticed an improvement in terms of stability, but also in functionality, and how some functions have been designed. Even aesthetically, look at how there are new animations. I feel like considering them mature devices even from the software point of view. As for the hardware, here we have the major differences. Let's look at what these differences might be in terms of scores. So, on this Poco X6 Pro, we have a MediaTek Dimensity 8300 Ultra processor produced at 4 nanometers with a power core at 3.35 GHz, while for the Poco F6 we have a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, also at 4 nanometers with a fairly similar architecture in terms of cores. We see, however, that we have a slightly lower maximum frequency at 3 GHz. However, regarding the benchmark results, the Poco F6 is superior. In fact, we see a higher score in both single-core and multi-core. The same situation is maintained for the GPU as well. Even on Antutu, we see that in reality the differences are not so exaggerated. We're looking at a score of 1,367,000 for Poco F6, 1,325,000 for Poco X6 Pro. Slightly higher scores in every area for Poco F6, but in daily use, guys, there are practically no differences. Also because the storage, so the memory, is UFS 4.0 for both devices, which therefore doesn't make you perceive a real difference in performance between these devices. Even in gaming, guys, I feel like considering them on par. Sure, Poco F6 has that slight extra push, but fundamentally the experience, the smoothness you'll have on this device corresponds to 90% of what you have on Poco F6. Even in terms of thermal throttling, I conducted tests, and we noticed that the behavior over time is generally positive for both, but slightly better for Poco F6, which throttles to 91% of its performance, while Poco X6 Pro goes down to 85%. But I repeat, these are really minimal differences. These minimal differences we notice in terms of actual use correspond also to other functions. For example, guys, regarding the integrated speakers, I would put them practically on par. They have good stereo audio with sound coming from the earpiece and the bottom speaker. For both, it has a dedicated opening, so they're totally approved in terms of audio. It's on par. As for the camera, well, I noticed some differences in favor of Poco F6. Obviously, I remind you that here we have a 64-megapixel main sensor, here a 50-megapixel sensor with a larger lens, which allows for photos that are, in my opinion, superior to the Poco X6 Pro, and especially in video, it allows us to reach up to 4K but with 60 frames per second. So on the camera side, I would put it ahead. 16-megapixel front camera, 20-megapixel front camera here. The results are slightly always in favor of Poco F6, but anyway guys, consider that we're not talking about camera phones. The main focus of one device, as well as the other, is to give the highest performance at the lowest possible price with an excellent screen and with an excellent battery. The battery is 5,000 milliamp hours for both, giving us excellent performance. You can easily get a day and a half of use for both. I noticed, however, that the X6 Pro is slightly superior in terms of battery by about 10%, so I would put it slightly ahead, but these are still two excellent devices. So guys, I think I've more or less analyzed the main aspects of these two devices. Practically apart from the battery, Poco F6 is slightly superior in everything, but really as a type of phone, as usage, they are two practically identical phones. Reason why in the face of a price difference that is actually anyway. I feel like recommending the Poco X6 Pro, unless you have specific needs, you prefer the design of the Poco F6 more, or maybe you find it on a special offer. But anyway, for a price that is on average about 70 to 80 euros in favor of Poco X6 Pro, you're getting a phone that for 90% of the total functions is identical to Poco F6. So guys, that's all for this video. I'd love to know in the comments what you think, which device you prefer. And I recommend you subscribe because soon there will be new comparison videos, including one with the CMF Phone 1. So all that's left for me to do is thank you for watching and see you in the next video.